Welcome to 52 Living Ideas. I never thought I'd be the one saying that instead of Shrikant. Shrikant is just got off work. He's hurrying home and he is going to be online in about 30 minutes or so. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. Tonight, we're talking about forgiveness. And what I said in the meetup, in the description in the meetup, is that forgiveness is very complex and is a very complex and challenging subject to analyze, and one that I don't believe fits into a one-size-fits-all category. Tonight, I'll share a few personal stories and actions I've taken in my attempts towards forgiveness. And what prompted this for me was when I was preparing for the talk I did 2 weeks ago on regrets. It led my mind to think about forgiveness and how that's an important part of when we're dealing with our regrets. I really do believe that moving forward in life successfully, moving into the future successfully, that we really do have to bravely face our wounds. We have to look at them. And I think part of that, facing them and looking at them and healing from that, does encompass the idea of forgiveness. However, I will say that I've struggled with what forgiveness is and what it looks like. I live in the Bible Belt, and I was raised in the Christian faith, which I really value my upbringing. I attribute a lot of my success today to that upbringing and that foundation. But I feel like a lot of times forgiveness is presented in a very trite manner, right? Oh, forgiveness is for the forgiver. I mean, have you heard that a million times? I've heard that a million times, and it's kind of trite. Sure, I get it. You know, when I forgive someone, that helps me, and I understand that. But that doesn't really explain the process of forgiveness. It doesn't really provide any practical application. And in all of my reading and in all of my thinking and in all of my pondering, I've not found anything that really presented like a 12-step process to forgiveness or something, you know, really definitive, actionable items. And so I've been muddling my way through, because I do want to walk in forgiveness, but really muddling my way through what that looks like. And so I've got 3 stories I'm going to share with y'all tonight. And all 3 are how I processed forgiveness and walked through it. And you know, even today, sometimes I wonder, have I forgiven? Am I on the other side of that? So maybe together we can think about it and talk about forgiveness. And my hope is that maybe something I say will be meaningful or helpful to each of you. So the first story I'm going to tell is about my biological father. So anyone who knows my story knows that I grew up in an abusive home. My father was both verbally abusive and sexually abusive to me when I was a teenager in high school. And he was also very absent in and out of my life. He had sexual addictions. So it wasn't just myself he abused. He slept with prostitutes. He had a lot of paraphernalia around the house. He had some real problems. But in light of being subjected to both the verbal abuse, the onslaught that I faced from him, and everything else, obviously you're going to have some problems with that. So one of the things was that I felt like I had, in my early years, in my 20s, after I got married and my biological father was in my life, I really felt like I had to be in relationship with him. You know, I felt like that was the right thing to do. He was my dad. It was my responsibility really to work on that relationship. And in my 20s and 30s, I just really wrestled with that. And he was still very, very verbally abusive to me. And I remember do y'all remember when we still had landline phones? And when we had caller ID and you paid X amount of dollars per month so that you could get caller ID to know who was calling. Well, I remember I got that just so I could know if my dad was calling, because I didn't know what I was going to face when I picked up the phone. And I would have to think, well, am I prepared today? Can I handle this? So that's what was going on in my 20s and 30s. And after I'd had I have 5 boys, and after I was homeschooling my children. And after I'd had my number 4 son, John Isaac, he was 6 months old, and I could no longer handle my dad and the onslaught from him. And so I broke ties with him. And it was a relief. It was an incredible relief. But in that relief, a couple of things happened. One is I had people in my church telling me that I shouldn't do that that was wrong, that I should maintain a relationship with him. And these were people that are good people I respect. They were mentors, people I loved, but I disagreed with them. I felt like that wasn't the right thing for me to do. And then also I entered a phase really of a lot of anger towards my dad. I was very, very angry, internally and outwardly, whenever he came up as a subject or came up in conversation. So then, through a series of events and other challenges in my life, I was seeing a therapist, and I began to work on boundaries. So my personality is one, I'm an overgiver in relationships. I love people and I love doing for people and helping, but in that kind of, and I score really high in agreeableness. I was trying to think of the word. I score really high in agreeableness. So I'm a disagreeable person. I love people, and I want to be in fellowship with them. And but I did not draw boundaries well at all. In fact, I really couldn't even identify boundaries. Like, I had no concept of what that even looked like. So I got in therapy, and I really began to dig in, because it was wreaking havoc in my life, not being able to draw boundaries. So I'm figuring this out in my 40s, and I start really working on my boundaries, and I'm figuring out how that looks and how that feels, so I can gauge what boundaries ought to feel like, and being brave and strong to draw boundaries, because that doesn't feel comfortable for me. It doesn't feel good. And sometimes it feels like I'm being mean, just personally. So I was really working on this. And at this time, this is 2013, and my dad, my biological father, reaches out to my mother and says, I'd like to reconnect with Shelly and her sister. So my mom reaches out to us, of course, because we're in relationship with my mom. That hasn't been broken or anything. They're divorced, have been for years and years. And my mom is remarried. And my sister immediately said, absolutely not. In no way am I having a relationship with Larry. That's my dad's name. And I really thought about it. And I was like, well, gosh, I mean, people can change. And I thought people can change. And how would I want to be treated if I had really screwed up and had changed? Well, I would want grace extended to me, right? I would want a second chance. And so, so I gave my dad a junk email address, or my mom gave me his email address, I think, and I emailed my dad, and I very, very distinctly laid out boundaries. I said, okay, I'm willing to be in communication via email, but here are all the boundaries that, there's like a couple of things, and this is not going to happen. I'm not doing this. I'm not having, this, I'm not eating Thanksgiving dinner with you, but we can communicate here. And of course, he immediately broke every boundary within a matter of maybe 2 months or something. And so I deleted my email account. I haven't had anything to do with him since. And during that process, though, post that, and I don't know if it was because I drew boundaries and I stood up to him in that way, in which I feel like was a healthy way, but my negative emotions towards him began to dissipate. And today, so that was 2013, we're in 2021, that was like 8 years ago. And today I have literally no emotion towards my dad. I have no negative emotion. I I think about all of the lessons that I've learned, which have been good out of that late relationship and out of the pain and out of the suffering. Um, I've learned a lot about parenting, um, how to parent, how not to parent, and that doesn't mean I've not failed as a parent, because I have many times, but it did give me a guide as to what not to do. And so I wonder, have is that have I forgiven my dad? I mean, if you asked me, I don't even know what I would say. Have I forgiven him? I'm not really sure. Maybe. Um, but for me, that's been the journey with him, and it's complicated because I don't know that I would say, yes, I have forgiven him. I can say other positive things about it, but I don't know that I could say I've forgiven him, although it would be important to me to reach that level, that plateau. So that's one story, and that's an ongoing story, I think. I'm not sure it's really even ended, right? In terms of defining forgiveness for me towards my dad. Um, Another story is after my divorce, I had no career, and I ended up going to work for a really small company with two business owners and three support staff. And I was just really learning I was just learning business acumen. I just didn't have a clue about, operating in the business world. But one thing I knew is that I needed to make money. I needed to make enough money to support a lot of kids, and I needed to build a retirement because I had no retirement, and I needed health insurance. So these are real motivators, right? And so I went to work, and this is in a small southern town. I'd known some of the people I'd worked with for a number of years. I knew my boss, who hired me for a very long time, probably a decade or more, just through the community. We weren't close or anything, but I knew him. So I went to this small office, and I showed up every day in business attire, heels, very professional looking, had my face on, makeup on, the whole thing, and I was ready to work. And I was working every angle I could, right, to recover. So during this time, the women in the office were not friendly at all. And I just kind of took that in stride. It didn't really matter to me. But it was awkward sometimes. And I just kind of let it go. And but one day I was at work, and the two business owners were not there. It was just me and two of the other girls. And they came at me and they attacked me. Um, just literally yelling at me and telling me all of the things that I had been doing wrong, that I was not dressed appropriately for work. They accused me of behaving inappropriately towards my bosses. And one of the things they accused me of, which was, in hindsight, it just cracks me up, but one of the gals told me that I didn't bring a big enough salad to the Christmas party, and her husband didn't get salad. I mean, it was just, the whole thing was bizarre, and they're yelling and screaming at me. And my boss, Scott, walks in, the one that I reported to directly, and he's just, I can see it. His face is deadpan, but he's just standing there. He's like, what is going on? So the girls eventually stop yelling. By this time, I'm sobbing, and I can't even hardly talk. You know that kind of sobbing you do where you're, I mean, that's what I was doing. I was so distraught, and I was mainly distraught, and at one point, this is the really funny thing. At one point, they told me that one day when I was out sick, they had anointed the office with oil against my evil spirit of seduction. So imagine someone telling you these things. It was just mind-boggling. So anyway, needless to say, I'm devastated. I go into Scott's office and I'm like mortified that I might have ever, he's married, he's happily married. Both of my bosses were happily married. I was mortified. My main concern was, had I ever done anything that he deemed was inappropriate, like in any way? And I'm crying and I'm like, Scott, please forgive me. I'm so sorry. I don't know. Have I ever done anything? He said, absolutely not, Shelley. Shelley, you've never done one thing ever. So that's the most bizarre experience I've ever seen. And he said, I'm gonna take care of this. And so I left, and the next day I came back, and a side note, which is pretty cool, is Scott did take care of it, and he called a meeting, and he is the first man in my life who's ever stood up for me, and it was a really cool feeling. And he just had my back, and he just said that we will never ever have anyone in this office treated the way that Shelley was treated yesterday. They will immediately be fired. So that was on a Friday. I left work and I went home and I talked with my good friends, and I was less upset and kind of laughing about the whole thing now, especially the evil spirit of seduction. That was, we have gotten more laughs out of that over the years than maybe anything in my relationship with my good friends, Carla and Jeff. And anyway, but over the weekend, I'm processing all this. And one of the things I'm thinking is that, okay, this has been a really hot mess. And my bosses have had to do things that deal with things that they shouldn't have to deal with. And I don't want to add to that. I don't want to make their burden heavier. So Monday morning, I went and I picked up flowers for all the girls in the office, the 3 girls, and I arrived and I put them on their desks. And I just wanted everyone to know that I wasn't going to make any more of an issue out of this. And let's try and let things be as normal as possible. Now, were things peachy keen from day one? No, I mean, it took a while to get some normalcy back, but let me tell you what happened. So did I feel forgiveness? I don't know that I felt forgiveness towards any of those women, especially not after just 3 days later. But I acted in forgiveness. I felt like that was the right thing to do. And a really cool thing happened out of that. One of the girls, she never had a clue, never took responsibility for any of it. She was not able to look into the fog from our meetup last night. But my other coworker wrote me this letter of apology, and she was so grieved that she had behaved that way. And we began to talk after that. And she kept asking me, how are you able to forgive us, Shelley, after what we did? And she'd literally get teary-eyed. And I would just tell her, I said, you know, we've all behaved badly in life. We've all made really heinous choices. We've treated people horribly. We've all done it. I've done it. I mean, who am I to withhold grace when I'm in the same boat, right? And so I feel forgiveness towards those women. I mean, as the typical definition of forgiveness. And especially Angela, that's the woman who I developed the close relationship with. We became good friends out of that. I mean, what a cool story, right? I would say that's the quintessential forgiveness story, right? That's pretty typical. So that's one version of forgiveness that I've experienced. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is my ex-husband. So, you know, any of you that have known me here know some of what I've been through with my ex, that he left my home violently in front of my children. I wrestled a gun away from him. He ended up going to prison. And I was left really destitute, with no money at all, no home, no nothing. So That's a lot to attempt to forgive. And I've spent the bulk of I've been divorced around 10 years now, going on 11, I guess. I've spent the bulk of that time really wrestling with that. Dealing with having no money to care for your children. It put me in a place where I had so much anger towards my ex-husband internally. I really I struggled even to I couldn't be around him. To this day, I don't really enjoy being around his family. But what I did do, and I did a lot of things wrong in that. But one of the things that I did do was I knew I needed to forgive him, even though I hated him. I hated him as much as you can hate anybody. But I knew I needed to forgive him. And so there was this constant battle in my mind. And I was dealing constantly with trying to take care of children and having no money. You know, am I going to have enough money for rent? My kids need haircuts and soccer cleats. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that, you know? And so it was this constant reminder of his choices, and we were all paying the consequences for it. And so it just, I can't even begin to tell you the hatred. Maybe some of you can identify with this in your own lives, but I had so much anger, and yet I desperately also knew or felt I needed to forgive him. So I'm working through this year after year. And one of the things that I think I did do right was I tried to act as if I had forgiven him when I could. One of the ways I did that was he also didn't have any money when he got out of prison because he's paying me child support and he's paying the people he stole money from back. And I mean, you know, he just has no means. And so on the occasion that he would come to Augusta, I would let him stay with me. And he could stay upstairs with the kids because we had 2 beds up there and one of the kids could sleep on the couch. And I allowed him to do that. And that was an act of forgiveness, even though I didn't feel forgiveness towards him. And the more I did that, the more it got better acting in forgiveness, even though I despised his very being. And I was still really struggling financially. I would go through every Christmas, I would go through an angry depression just because I did not know. It's very frustrating to want to be able to do for your children and not be able to do for them. Very, very frustrating. So then I started inviting him. He would come over to eat with us. And I felt like these things were good for the children as well, right? So I felt like it would maybe build relationship. It would help repair relationships, give them time with their dad. So he would come over occasionally, he would eat. He doesn't live here, he lives like 5 hours away. So this is very occasionally. And then I would have him over for Thanksgiving. He would come for Thanksgiving, or maybe didn't ever come for Christmas. We have a different arrangement for Christmas. But so over time, it was acting in forgiveness was getting easier and easier. And that was really a blessing because really I wanted to return good for evil. I didn't want to return evil for evil. My personality is such that I've done that before. I've returned evil for evil and I just feel like shit afterwards. Like I feel horrid. I don't like feeling that way. So, and that's also how I've raised my kids. We're not gonna, just because your brothers punched you does not mean we're going to punch them back, right? It's that kind of idea. So then, and here we're getting to the end of this story. So then we went through I had an experience where one of my children demeaned myself and my ex-husband in a public manner. Um, and it was very public, and it was incredibly painful. Um, and I personally was grieved. I've got great relationships with all of my boys. I have a great relationship with this son. We've persevered through that. Um, but it was obviously hurtful. But the thing that was so surprising was how grieved I was for their dad. I was so grieved for their dad. I cried and cried and cried for Joey, because in this instance that happened where he and I were both demeaned, um, he went really to task on his dad. And my heart broke for my ex-husband. My heart had never broken for him before. But in that breaking, I felt compassion for him for the first time in well over a decade. And it eradicated every single bit of animosity and anger I ever had. It was kind of like a supernatural event. I'm not really sure. Like I say, this is the good that came out of that experience, right? And so, I think about that, like maybe compassion is a part of forgiveness. I don't know, and if you were to ask me now, well, have you forgiven your ex-husband, Shelley? I don't know. Have I forgiven him? I'm not sure. But I think it was helpful for me to act like I had forgiven him. It was good for my kids. I think it was beneficial for me. And as I have pondered on forgiveness these 2 weeks when I've been preparing for this has been such a good mental process for me as I've thought about this. And so I appreciate everybody here listening and allowing me to share this and share my thoughts on it. But this is the statement that, and Shrikant is back. Hey, perfect timing. I'm at the very end, Shrikant. So this is the statement that I have come up with for the moment to define forgiveness for me. And I wrote this down, and I said, maybe forgiveness is coming to terms with an event and entering a mental state of peace. And if that's forgiveness, then in some of these more challenging experiences in my life, then I have forgiven. And that's it. And so thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share. I appreciate it very much. Shrikant?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. Shelley, what are the questions you have for people in the breakout rooms?
Very good. Thank you, Shrikant. Okay. So if you're comfortable talking about it, what complexities of forgiveness do you struggle with? And then, do you believe every sin or transgression can or should be forgiven?